The sky was dark, clouds heavy with rain, and the forest below was silent. Jason, a human engineer working on a remote planet, was walking through the thick trees. He had received a strange signal on his scanner, something not part of any human system. Curious and a little cautious, he followed it deep into the woods. After walking for an hour, he saw smoke. Then, through the bushes, he saw it. A broken escape pod lay half buried in the mud, metal cracked and wires sparking. It looked alien, very old, and not from any known design. Jason stepped closer, holding his tool light. The pod door was jammed, but he heard something inside. A small sound, like a weak breath. With effort, he pulled the door open, and what he saw made him freeze. Inside was a tiny alien girl, curled up, her skin pale and glowing faintly blue. She looked young, maybe 10 or 12 in human age. Her eyes opened slowly, big and full of fear. She looked at Jason and gasped. Then, without thinking, she reached out and touched his chest. Just a soft touch, like checking if he was real. But the moment her fingers touched him, she gasped again and pulled back. Her cheeks turned bright red, glowing. Jason didn't move. He could tell she was scared but not dangerous. She was trembling, her hands cold, her breathing uneven. Jason slowly took off his jacket and placed it over her. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." Of course, she didn't understand. She blinked at him, confused, but didn't push him away. Instead, she looked around nervously, as if expecting someone or something to follow. Jason picked her up gently. She was light, like she hadn't eaten in days. He carried her back through the forest, all the way to his cabin. The storm had started, rain falling hard as thunder rolled above. Inside his cabin, he placed her on a small cot near the heater. She curled up again. Holding his jacket tightly, Jason warmed up some food, unsure what she could eat. He placed a small bowl in front of her. She sniffed it, then pushed it away. Jason sat beside her, watching her carefully. Her fingers moved in strange patterns, like a silent language. He didn't understand, but she was clearly trying to say something. Suddenly, she stood up and walked to his workbench. She pointed at a screen showing the broken signal from her pod. Then she looked at him, eyes wide with panic. Jason understood one thing. She had crashed, and someone would be looking for her. That night, she didn't sleep much. She kept waking up, looking around, frightened. At one point, she walked over and sat near Jason's bed. She didn't say anything, just held the edge of his blanket with her tiny hand. Jason looked at her glowing red cheeks again. He had never seen a creature blush like that. He didn't know her name, where she came from, or why she had crashed. But something told him this little alien girl had a story worth listening to, and maybe, just maybe, she had just chosen him to be part of it. Jason stayed awake most of the night, sitting in his old wooden chair, watching the small alien girl sleep. She was curled up near the heater, wrapped in a blanket twice her size. Her skin glowed faintly in the dark, like moonlight trapped under her skin. Every now and then, she twitched or made soft noises, as if dreaming of something terrible. He didn't know what to do. She didn't speak his language, and he had no translator for her kind. Still, something about her silence spoke louder than words. She was scared, hungry, and lost. He could see it in her eyes. When morning came, the storm had passed. Jason made breakfast, eggs and bread, and placed a plate near her. She looked at the food, but didn't touch it. Instead, she watched him quietly, her eyes sharp, almost too old for her small body. Jason tried to smile. He pointed to the food, then to his mouth, showing her how to eat. She stared, unmoving. Then suddenly, she crawled away from the cot and sat in the corner of the room, hugging her knees. Jason sighed and stepped back, giving her space. She didn't trust him yet, and maybe she had a reason. Still, he wasn't going to give up. She was just a child, and clearly running from something. Later that day, he went outside to gather fresh water. When he returned, the girl was not on the cot anymore. Panic rose in his chest, but before he could call out, he heard a soft sound. He looked behind the chair, and there she was, hiding. She had one of his boots in her arms, hugging it like a teddy bear. When she saw him, her cheeks glowed red again, and she turned her face away. Jason didn't laugh, even though it looked funny. He just whispered, "You're safe here." Of course, she didn't understand, but maybe she felt it. That night, Jason placed a pillow and a soft blanket on the floor near his bed. He nodded to her, showing it was okay if she wanted to sleep there. She didn't move at first, just sat in the corner like before. But around midnight, when he pretended to sleep, he felt a small presence come close. Soft steps on the wooden floor, slow and careful. She lay down on the blanket, pulling it tightly around her, still holding his boot. Jason didn't open his eyes, but he smiled in the dark. He knew what that meant. She didn't trust him fully yet, but she didn't fear him anymore. That was a start. In the middle of the night, thunder rumbled again. The alien girl gasped and sat up, eyes wide. Jason sat up too, holding out his hand. She didn't touch him this time, but she didn't run either. She pointed to the door, then made a strange motion with her fingers, like drawing something in the air. Jason didn't understand, but he saw the fear in her eyes. Something was out there, or she thought something would come. He checked the scanner. No movement, no signals nearby, but fear didn't need proof. Jason stayed near the door for the rest of the night, keeping watch, and the girl lay back down, eyes open, watching him. Before sunrise, she finally closed her eyes. Jason looked at her peaceful face, and something inside him shifted. She wasn't just a lost alien child anymore. She had become his responsibility. And if someone came looking for her, Jason was ready. He would protect her no matter what. The next morning, sunlight pushed through the cracks in Jason's cabin windows. The alien girl was still asleep on the floor, curled up tight, holding the boot like it was her only friend. Jason quietly boiled water and poured it into a cup, trying not to wake her. But the moment he stepped on a loose floorboard, her eyes opened fast. She didn't scream or speak. She just sat up and looked at him, blinking slowly. Her cheeks glowed red for a second, then faded again. Jason placed the cup on the table and walked back to his workbench, giving her space. She slowly stood up, her bare feet making no sound. She walked to the cup, sniffed it, then looked at Jason. He nodded, smiling gently. She picked up the cup with both hands and sipped, her body relaxing a little. As she lifted the cup higher, Jason noticed something. There were dark lines on her wrists, half hidden under her long sleeves. They looked like bruises, thin and circular, chains maybe, or metal cuffs. The moment she saw him staring, she dropped the cup. It hit the floor and rolled away, spilling the warm water. Her sleeves shot down fast, covering her arms. She backed up, eyes wide and breathing fast. Jason raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm sorry." She stared for a long second, then turned her back to him. She walked back to the corner and sat down, hugging her knees like before. Jason sat near his bench, pretending to work, but inside his thoughts were racing. Those marks weren't natural, and they weren't old either. Someone had done that to her, and recently, he needed to know more. Not to hurt her, but to protect her. If she had escaped from someone dangerous, they might still be looking, and she didn't have anyone else, just him. Later that day, the girl walked up to him while he was fixing an old drone. She stood quietly, then reached into her pocket and pulled out something, a small flat stone, smooth and black. She placed it on the table, then sat down and waited. Jason picked it up and looked closer. There were tiny symbols scratched into it, circles, lines, a triangle with a dot. It wasn't human writing, but she pointed at one symbol, then to herself. Jason understood. It was her name or maybe her identity. She pointed again, this time at another symbol. Then she pressed her hand against the table and made a motion. It looked like a door closing, then locking. Her face turned serious, eyes fixed on Jason. She was telling him something about being locked up. Jason grabbed a pen and started drawing what she did, trying to copy the symbols. She nodded when he got one right, then reached over and added a new one. Her hands moved fast like she was racing time. Then she drew something that made Jason freeze. A cage, and inside it, a small figure, just like her. Next to the cage, another shape, tall, with strange eyes and long fingers. Whoever that was, they were the ones who locked her up. Jason looked at the drawing, then at her. Tears were forming in her big alien eyes, but she didn't cry. She just stared at him, waiting for his reaction. He nodded slowly, his voice calm. "No one's going to cage you again," he whispered. She didn't understand the words, but she felt something. Her eyes softened, and she finally sat beside him without shaking. That night, she didn't sleep in the corner. She quietly lay on the cot, pulling the blanket close. Jason sat beside her on the floor, keeping watch. He now knew one thing for sure. She wasn't just a lost child, she was a prisoner who had escaped. And if someone had hurt her before, they'd have to go through him now. The sun had barely touched the horizon when Jason heard a soft ping from his outer motion sensor. He looked at the screen. Someone was approaching, not from the usual trail, but from the woods, slowly and carefully. Jason stood up and grabbed his small blaster from the wall. The alien girl was still asleep on the cot, curled up, her tiny hand gripping the blanket. Jason didn't want to wake her, not unless it became serious. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. A tall figure was walking toward his cabin, dressed in long brown robes. The man, no, not a man. His skin was greenish and scaled, his face hidden under a hood. He raised one hand in greeting, his other hand behind his back. "Greetings, human," the figure said in a slow voice. "I am a traitor, lost from my route." Jason didn't lower the blaster. Lost traders don't walk out of forests, Jason replied, eyes sharp. The figure chuckled softly. Fair, but I saw your smoke. I thought maybe you could offer water. Jason kept his eyes on him. Something didn't feel right. This being was too calm, too clean for someone lost in the wild. Still, Jason nodded slowly and pointed to a barrel near the wall. Take what you need, he said. The stranger walked over, filled a flask, but his eyes kept drifting toward the cabin window. Jason noticed it, and his grip on the blaster tightened. Do you live alone? The stranger asked casually. Jason's jaw tensed. That's not your business. The stranger smiled, sharp teeth showing beneath the hood. My apologies, I'm just curious, he said, backing away. Once he was gone, Jason walked back inside quickly. The alien girl was awake, sitting up, her eyes wide and filled with fear. Before Jason could say anything, she rushed to him and tugged his sleeve. She dragged him toward the door, pointing underneath the porch. Jason knelt down and his heart skipped. A small, black disc was attached to the wood, barely visible. He pulled it off and scanned it with his tools. It was a tracking beacon, alien tech locked onto her energy signature. She knew, Jason muttered, looking at the girl. She nodded, her hands moving fast in panic, drawing a circle and a triangle again and again. Jason understood. They had found her signal, and now they knew where she was. He threw the beacon into the fire, watching it melt. The girl stood silently, shaking. Jason crouched in front of her and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. You're safe, he said. I promise. But his own chest was heavy. He wasn't sure anymore. That night, Jason double-locked every door, checked the perimeter twice. He even set small traps around the cabin, just in case. The alien girl sat near the window, her eyes scanning the dark forest like a soldier. She didn't speak, but her body never relaxed. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the wind. Then, just after midnight, a shadow moved in the trees. Jason raised his blaster quietly and looked through the scope, but there was nothing there. Not anymore. The girl stood behind him now, holding the smooth stone with her name scratched on it. She pointed to it, then to her chest, then to the door. Jason understood. Whoever was after her knew exactly who she was, and they were coming soon. He whispered softly, then let them come. The girl blinked, and for the first time she smiled, a small, tired smile. Then her hand reached out slowly, touched his shoulder again, and her cheeks glowed that bright, beautiful red. The next morning was quiet, too quiet. Even the birds in the trees had stopped singing. Jason stood near the window, his eyes scanning the trees beyond his cabin. The memory of the stranger still lingered in his mind like a warning. Behind him, the tiny alien girl was drawing shapes on the dusty floor with her finger. She had made 3 symbols in a row, a triangle, a circle, and a wave. Jason watched her, then knelt down beside her. You keep drawing this, he said softly. What does it mean? The girl looked up at him, her glowing red cheeks softening. She didn't speak, but she touched each shape and tapped her chest. Jason tilted his head, trying to understand. She tapped the triangle again, then gently touched his hand. Jason slowly grabbed his datapad and began to copy her shapes. When he held it up, she nodded quickly and added another symbol using her finger. It was a spiral, and as she drew it, her fingers trembled. Jason could see the pain behind that symbol. It meant something dark, something she feared. Over the next hour, she began teaching him, one symbol at a time, one gesture after another. She used her hands, her eyes, and even soundless expressions. Jason tried his best to follow. He wrote everything down, sketch by sketch. After some time, he held up the pad and asked, "This one, does it mean home?" The girl stared, then slowly nodded. She pointed at the spiral again and placed her hand over her heart. Jason's breath caught. He was right. The spiral meant pain, or maybe imprisonment. Later, she stood up and walked to his workbench. There, she pointed at a broken drone, then at herself. Jason was confused at first, until she mimicked her hands being tied and her head jerking from side to side. Then she bent forward, shook slightly, and held out her arm as if being injected. Jason's eyes darkened. It was clear now. She had been tested, controlled, may be even tortured. She wasn't just a refugee. She was a test subject, someone's experiment. She took his pen and drew one more shape, a broken cage. Then she pointed to the door, and then her own feet. Jason stared, putting the pieces together. "You escaped," he whispered. "You ran away." The girl nodded slowly, her face sad but strong. Jason felt a mix of anger and admiration. She had survived something terrible and somehow made it all the way to him. Now she was trying to help him understand. That evening, Jason worked on his small translator device. Using her symbols and hand signs, he programmed basic meanings into it. The device would flash a word when a symbol was drawn on its screen. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. When he showed it to her, she touched it gently and blinked in surprise. She drew the triangle, and the screen lit up. Me. She smiled. A real smile, shy but full of light. Then she drew another sign, and the screen flashed. Safe. Jason looked at her, and she looked back at him. Two worlds, two lives. Now slowly connected by this silent language, she placed her small hand on his arm, and for the first time, she said something in a soft whisper, not her language, but his. Safe, she said carefully, like tasting the word. Jason didn't know how she learned it, but she had. His throat tightened, and he nodded slowly. Yes, he replied. You're safe here. Outside, in the dark forest, something watched from the shadows. But inside the cabin, for that moment, peace lived in silence. The wind was still, but Jason felt something moving in the air. It was that strange pressure, like the calm before a storm. He had checked the scanner 3 times, but now it showed something new. A fast signal, coming from orbit, heading toward his location. He turned to the alien girl who sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing again. Her face froze when she saw the blinking lights on his scanner. She stood up quickly, eyes wide, and pointed at the sky. Jason understood. Whoever she had escaped from was back. He grabbed his emergency pack, shoved in the translator, tools, and basic supplies. Then he looked at her and said, "We have to go." She nodded without hesitation, like she had been ready for this moment all along. Jason lifted the floor hatch and led her down into the hidden tunnel beneath the cabin. It was narrow, cold, and dark, but safe. For now, the tunnel led to a hidden shed deep in the woods. Jason had built it for storage, but today it would be their escape. Inside the shed was his old hoverbike, dusty but working. He loaded the supplies fast, motioning for her to get on. The alien girl climbed behind him, gripping his back tightly. Her small fingers clutched his jacket as the engine roared to life. Then they were gone, flying through the trees. Behind them, the sound of ships filled the air, sharp, metallic, not human. Jason had heard those engines before. They weren't traders, and they weren't rescuers. They were hunters. A red beam flashed past them, burning the side of a tree. The alien girl ducked and held Jason tighter. He pushed the hoverbike harder, weaving between trees, leaping over fallen logs. The forest blurred around them, but Jason didn't slow down. They reached the cliffs, a sharp drop overlooking the valley. Jason pulled a sharp turn, heading along the edge. Below, a river twisted like a silver snake. One wrong move, and they'd fall. But behind them, the hunters were gaining. The girl tapped Jason's shoulder and pointed to a broken cave entrance ahead. Jason nodded, steering toward it. They burst through the hanging vines and slid into the shadows. The hoverbike skidded to a stop, engine humming low. Silence returned for a moment. Then a shadow passed over the cave entrance, one of the ships hovering above. Jason turned off the engine and motioned for her to stay quiet. The girl sat still, not even breathing loud. Outside, heavy boots landed on the ground. Voices spoke in a strange language, short and angry. Jason held his blaster tight, sweat rolling down his back. He had no plan if they were found, but he wasn't going to let them take her. The girl reached into her pocket and pulled out her stone again. She pressed it to her chest, eyes shut. The stone began to glow faintly, the same color as her skin. Then the light faded and her body relaxed. Jason stared, confused, but she looked at him and smiled. A quiet message, like she had just done something important. Suddenly, the voices outside shouted and faded away. The sound of the ship engines grew distant. They were leaving. Jason looked at her, eyebrows raised. "What did you do?" he whispered. She simply tapped the stone and held a finger to her lips. Jason nodded slowly, still unsure, but grateful. They stayed in the cave until nightfall. Then, under the stars, they climbed back on the hoverbike and rode farther into the wild. The chase had begun, but so had something else. Jason was no longer just a stranger who found a lost girl. He was now her protector. And maybe, just maybe, her only hope. The stars above them blinked like cold eyes as Jason and the alien girl rode deeper into the wild. The trees grew taller, the air colder, and the signals around them faded into silence. They had escaped for now, but Jason knew it wouldn't last. The hunters would return, stronger and angrier. The girl was quiet, holding tightly to him as the hoverbike glided through rocky terrain. Jason's mind raced with questions. Where was she from? Who had locked her up, and why? He needed answers, not just for himself, but to keep her safe. They had reached a cliffside cave, hidden behind thick vines, and stopped to rest. Inside the cave, Jason made a fire and unrolled the emergency blanket. The girl sat cross-legged, placing her glowing stone on the ground again. Jason pulled out his datapad and the few broken parts he had salvaged from her crashed escape pod, wires, shards of crystal, and a strange silver cube with faint symbols etched into it. He hadn't touched the cube before, not until now, but something about it pulled at him, like it was waiting. The girl's eyes widened as he turned it over in his hands. Then she stood up, walked over, and placed her palm on the cube gently. It lit up, humming softly. Jason gasped as a 3D projection bloomed from the cube, blue lines, rotating symbols, and a flickering star map. It was cracked and incomplete, but it was real. The alien girl pointed at a flashing dot on the map, then to herself. Jason narrowed his eyes. "That's not a home planet," he whispered. "It's right here, on Earth." She nodded, her face serious, then made a new sign, a spiral, the same one she used for pain and captivity, but this time, she pointed away from the spiral and toward a glowing circle far on the edge of the map. Jason understood. She hadn't been running from home, she was running to something. The dot on Earth marked a location hidden in the mountains, near an old excavation site. It wasn't a colony or base, it looked like a temple. He stared at the symbol beside the glowing circle. It was ancient, matching nothing from human records, but somehow, Jason felt it, like the map itself was alive, calling them forward. The girl gently touched his arm, her red glow soft and hopeful. She wanted to go there, and Jason knew this was where the real answers waited, not just about who she was, but why she had come to Earth at all. He packed the cube carefully, storing it in his satchel, then looked at the girl. "We're going there, aren't we?" She smiled, small and quiet, then drew a circle on his hand using her fingertip. It glowed briefly, and Jason felt a strange warmth through his skin. The next day they set off again, riding through rocky paths and snow-lined trees. As they moved, Jason noticed how the girl kept her eyes on the mountains. She was guiding him now, like she had been here before, or maybe, like something inside her remembered the way. They stopped at nightfall near an old ruin. Jason used his tools to scan the area and found fragments of alien metal in the ground. Buried under the soil was the broken signal source, another part of her escape pod. Inside it, he found more shattered tech. And a second cube, smaller but warm to the touch. He placed it beside the first one. The two cubes pulsed together, and the map updated. New paths appeared, hidden tunnels, sealed chambers beneath the earth. Jason stared in shock. This place, it's not just old, it was built for her. The alien girl walked to the edge of the ruin, her body glowing softly under the moonlight. She didn't speak, but Jason could feel her energy change. Something ancient was awakening, and soon they would face the truth together. The wind howled across the mountain cliffs as Jason and the alien girl stood before the ancient stone arch. Half buried in snow, the structure didn't look like much, just weathered stone and cracked symbols, but the moment she stepped closer, the entire arch lit up, glowing with soft blue light. Jason's eyes widened. "It's reacting to you," he whispered. The girl walked slowly, her hands trembling slightly. As she passed under the arch, the glowing followed her steps like ripples in water. Jason stepped in after her, blaster ready, heart racing. Inside the mountain, they found a narrow tunnel that led deep underground. Walls covered in unknown carvings surrounded them. Jason ran his fingers across the symbols. They pulsed under his touch. "These are alive," he said, breathless. The girl nodded, then pressed her palm against one large panel. A loud hum echoed through the chamber. The wall slid open with a deep grinding sound, revealing a wide circular room. It looked like a temple, but one not made for worship. It was more like a vault, a resting place. In the center stood a tall pillar, smooth and dark. The moment she stepped forward, it lit up. Images flashed around the walls, stars, planets, and beings made of pure light. Jason turned slowly, watching the entire room come alive. The girl raised her glowing stone, holding it high. It floated from her hand and locked into the pillar. Light burst outward, forming a spiral above their heads. Jason shielded his eyes, but she just stood still, letting the energy pass through her. Her small body began to rise slowly off the ground. Jason's heart jumped. What's happening to her? Her eyes opened, now glowing fully white. The pillar pulsed, and beams of light connected to her chest, her arms, and forehead. It wasn't hurting her, it was unlocking something. Ancient data, memories, energy. Jason couldn't explain it, but he felt it. This temple was built for her kind, and she wasn't just a random child who crashed. She was something more. A projection appeared in front of Jason, A tall figure made of light spoke in a strange language. Then, through the translator, words began to form. "Welcome, Guardian. You are not of our blood, but you carry the spark of choice." Jason blinked, confused. "Guardian? I'm no guardian." The voice continued. "She is Seed 7, a child of memory, keeper of light, protector of peace." Jason turned toward the girl, still floating, still glowing. "Seed 7, he whispered. "You're not just an escapee. You're a key." The light around her began to fade. She lowered gently to the ground, knees hitting the floor. Jason ran to her and caught her just in time. She was breathing hard but smiled faintly, cheeks glowing red again. "Safe," she whispered, eyes fluttering. Jason hugged her gently. "Yeah, you did it." But deep down he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something far greater. The temple began to dim, and the pillar sealed itself. The glowing stone returned to her hand, smaller now, but pulsing softly. She looked at Jason and reached for his hand. When their fingers touched, Jason felt something deep in his chest. A connection, powerful and strange. It wasn't just trust or friendship. It was something older, something sacred. She had chosen him, and now he was tied to her path. Wherever it led, he would follow. They stepped out of the temple together, snow falling gently. Above them, the night sky opened like a silent ocean of stars. Jason looked at her, no longer seeing just a lost girl. She was Seed 7, and the galaxy was about to remember her name. The cold wind blew harder as Jason and the alien girl stood outside the ancient temple. Snow swirled around them, but neither of them moved. Jason stared at the night sky, his eyes fixed on the blinking lights above. 3 ships had entered the atmosphere. They were coming. The girl stood beside him, her glowing stone still warm in her hand. She didn't look afraid this time, just calm and quiet. Jason checked his blaster and secured the strap across his chest. "We can't run anymore," he said softly. "This ends here." She looked up at him and nodded, then reached into her pouch and pulled out a shard of crystal. Jason had seen it before. It came from her broken pod, but now it was glowing, as if the temple had recharged it. Together they walked to the cliffside, where the entrance of the temple glowed faintly behind them. Far across the trees, bright lights moved between the shadows. The hunters had landed. Jason could already hear the faint hum of their boots crunching through snow. The girl pressed the crystal into the ground. Light shot outward in a circle, forming a barrier between them and the forest. Jason's jaw tightened. "You really are something else." She just smiled, her cheeks glowing red for the briefest second. Then the silence broke. Blaster fire exploded from the trees, red bolts slamming into the shield. Jason raised his weapon and fired back, his shots aimed at the trees. The shield held strong, but it wouldn't last forever. The first hunter stepped out from the shadows, the same one from the cabin. The so-called traitor. His hood was gone now, revealing reptilian skin and glowing yellow eyes. He smiled cruelly, speaking in a cold, sharp voice. "Return the seed," he demanded. "She is ours." Jason stepped forward, fury in his voice. "She belongs to no one," he shouted. "She's not your tool." The hunter laughed, stepping closer. "She is not a child." And then the hunter sneered. "She is a living key, a weapon, a gate to something your kind cannot understand." Jason didn't care what she was to them. To him, she was someone worth protecting, someone who had suffered enough. The girl stepped beside him and raised her hand. Her stone glowed brighter than ever, pulsing like a heartbeat. The ground beneath them began to tremble. The temple responded, walls shifting, symbols lighting up behind them. The hunter raised his weapon, ready to fire. Jason aimed his blaster, but before he could shoot, the girl whispered something, a single word in her language, and time stopped. Snow froze in midair. Blaster bolts hung like floating stars. Jason looked around in awe. Everything was still, except for her. She walked forward, her eyes glowing with white light, her skin shimmering like crystal. She stood in front of the hunter, raised both hands, and with a pulse of light erased his weapon into dust. Then she turned and looked at the others in the shadows. A wave of light expanded outward and they vanished, teleported, scattered like sand in the wind. Time returned in a rush. Jason blinked as the snow fell again, soft and slow. The girl turned to him, her glow fading, her body weak. He ran to catch her as she collapsed into his arms. "I've got you," he whispered, holding her close. She smiled weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "Safe," she said. Jason nodded. "You're safe now." The storm had passed, the enemies gone, but the truth remained. She was more than anyone had guessed. She had power, yes. But what made her truly strong was her choice. She chose not to destroy, but to protect. And she had chosen him, not as her owner, not as her guard, but as her friend, her shield, her human. The sky cleared as dawn arrived. Golden light spilled across the snowy cliffs, washing away the darkness of the long night. Jason sat beside the alien girl, still holding her gently in his arms. Her glow had faded, but her eyes slowly opened again. She looked up at him with soft, tired eyes. Her small hand moved to his chest, resting lightly. Jason smiled, brushing snow from her cheek. "You did it," he whispered. "You stopped them." She blinked, then looked around. The temple entrance, the quiet trees, the empty skies. For the first time, there was no danger, no fear chasing her, just peace. And the sound of the wind moving gently through the mountains. Jason helped her sit up, placing his jacket around her shoulders. She didn't need it, but he knew it made her feel safe. She looked down at the stone in her hand. It was no longer glowing. Its power was spent, but it had done its part. Behind them, the temple sealed itself, the doors fading into smooth stone. Whatever power lived inside had gone quiet again. But Jason knew something had changed, something in her and something in him. They built a small fire and shared a quiet meal. She still couldn't eat much, but she tried, for him, and every time he smiled, her cheeks lit up red, just a little, just enough to remind him of the day they met. Later that afternoon, a signal beeped on Jason's datapad. A human patrol ship had picked up his emergency beacon from days ago. Help was coming, and with it, questions, scientists, and governments. Jason glanced at her as she sat by the fire. Would they take her again? Would they lock her in some lab like before? Would they see her as a child, or just a mystery to solve? He didn't want to find out. He crouched beside her and tapped the translator screen. "I can hide you," he said slowly. "We can run again if you want." She looked at him, then tilted her head, confused. He jerked her. "You, a symbol in the dirt. A ship leaving, a person waving goodbye." Then he drew another one. A house, two small figures sitting side by side. She stared at both, her glowing red eyes wide. He pointed at her, then pointed at the two symbols. "Your choice," he whispered. She stared at the drawings for a long time. Then, without a word, she erased the ship and gently circled the one with the house. Jason smiled softly, eyes warm. "You want to stay?" he said. She nodded, then reached out and tapped his heart with her fingers. Her voice was quiet, still learning, but clear enough. "Home," she said. Jason felt something in his chest tighten and release. Not fear, not stress, just peace. He held out his hand, and she took it, her small fingers wrapping around his. Two worlds, now one. When the human patrol ship landed nearby, Jason met them alone. He told them there was wreckage, yes, but no survivor. He had buried the wreck deep in the snow. He told no one about the temple or the girl, not because he didn't trust them, but because he trusted her more. That night, back in the cabin, she curled up beside the fire, wrapped in blankets, her stone resting beside her. Jason sat nearby, repairing a broken comm. She looked at him once, eyes glowing faintly. He smiled and she smiled back. Then, softly, she said another word, one she hadn't said before. "Jason?" He froze, stunned. Then his smile grew wider than ever. "Yeah," he said, voice full of warmth. "That's me." The stars above twinkled softly, and for the first time the galaxy felt a little smaller because a tiny alien girl had touched one human heart and decided to stay.